Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order.
Okay, yep, let's.
So, good afternoon, everyone. This is the CSSU Board of School Directors regular meeting for May 14th, 2014. I'd like to start with adjustments to the agenda. We are taking 8.4, authorized signature authority for summer actions is coming off of the consent agenda. We'll make it 7.4 action matters. I had a technical correction to the minutes. If anybody's uncomfortable, we can pull it off, but it was just a correcting some typos. So we'll leave that on. I'm hearing no complaints. Any other adjustments to the agenda? Okay, 3.0 audience and communications. I don't see an audience, so that makes it easy. So far, so good. How am I doing for time, Kevin?
You're ahead. Doing good now.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, so we're going to go to reports to the board. 5.1 Colt report.
Okay, just a couple things. One, there's a colloquium for our new mentors and their mentees tomorrow, right here at CBU?
Yes, in the cafeteria.
And I know that at least one board member has indicated that they can be here, but if you can be here, it's an opportunity to, acknowledge that they've done a lot of good work, that, our senior teachers are mentoring our newer, upcoming to someday be our senior teachers. And so what time, Molly?
3:30 to 5:30. If you want to come just for part of it, that's fine. Just a great way for you to get acquainted with one more program.
Right.
That we
Yep, it's an important program to get people on board. Cindy and I are working on developing a one-pager that would say when the boards, one or another, is embroiled in a legal matter that you may or may not know about, how do we keep you informed at the right level? Because in some of these cases, you're going to maybe be the jury. So we just need to make sure that we sort that out. Cindy, you want to say anything more about that?
It's just going to sort out like when an insurance carrier is going to be providing you coverage, when you might have to get your own coverage. If you look at the back of the agenda where it has types of decision making, it'll be built up something like that.
Okay, any questions about that? But we've got that on our short to-do list, so that'll be coming. I think that's it. Any questions about the report? There's a lot of good information there from Molly based on tonight's presentation, and from Megan based on the decision that you'll be making later. So, and the administration recommendation for that.
Did you have anything on the legislative update? It just said verbal.
Yeah, well, because when we did this, of course, we didn't know, and I'm sure you all know that the consolidation bill never got through the Senate. I'm guessing you might know, and if you don't, this is an important thing to start thinking about, that 889, which was the finance bill, included a provision that as we hire new teachers starting July next year, not this year, $1,000 per teacher per year. So fully implemented for Chittenden South, that'll be like $400,000 a year. So is to cover the teacher retirement, right.
Healthcare.
Teacher health care and retirement that they had not been funding, and they increased the benefit maybe 5 years ago, and I don't know exactly why the numbers came up short, but I know that that's where they landed with that. We will be paying that part. Teachers will be paying an additional part also. So it really was kind of a grand bargain, not by us, by the legislators to say, okay, here's what individual teachers will pay, here's what boards will pay. Just so you know what their thinking is, or at least I've heard the thinking is, that when we hire new teachers, we do not hire them at the same level as the retiring teacher. And that works as long as the person who's leaving is really a retiring teacher. If the person who's leaving is mid-career, then we don't have that extra $1,000. And
So is there will there be anything from the
the School Boards Association sort of split. I feel like, we keep hearing from the governor, your per pupil spending is through the
Right.
roof, and yet once again, we get something we have no choice in
It's gonna hit us
pay.
right in
How can we?
I think this is
What can we do?
problematic for everyone. So-
Right, but it's, it's so frustrating
Right.
to keep hearing, like, our costs are so out of control, but we have all these things we need to pay.
Agreed. So that might relate to when we get to input on carousel meeting schedule and why that's even on the agenda, could link to that.
And we could even have the SBA come in and, I mean, there are ways that we can get information and have them hear us and be our voice. And there's a chunk of legislators who are school board members who do that. And we just have to keep at it. But everybody's trying to stretch too few dollars, I think.
So my understanding is as you hire a new teacher, you'd have to start paying this $1,000 for that teacher for the rest of that teacher's tenure.
Exactly.
So it'll ramp up.
That's why it
Right.
fully
So what we do then is take our teacher's salary schedule and go down $1,000?
No, but when you,
I know.
oh, okay.
So I'm just wondering,
Well,
But near term, it's just new hires.
It is.
It's not existing hires, so it'd be
Right.
helpful for us to get like a 5-year projection on that, knowing that it would probably change legislatively within 5 years, because it's gonna be problematic.
So, Joan, remind me, is it implemented July 1, 2015 or July 1, 2016?
It's for teachers hired in
It makes a difference.
15.
15, if it's 15.
Well, 15 though, we're already.
No, that would be the next year.
That
So
would be
not
people coming
this
on
year.
board this
Yeah,
August.
Do you remember if
gives
it's
you-
15?
My sense is
it
it's
gives
this
you
year
the year
for the,
out.
So,
Yeah.
so if it is 15, so July 1, 2015, the reason that could be more problematic than other years is this is the year that we're anticipating that we will have more new hires, because this is the year that the benefit becomes available to many teachers. The 2-person health and retirement becomes available on July 1, 2015. Right, Cindy?
Well, for those teachers, we would see at least $1,000 savings,
Right.
most likely.
Right, that's true. Okay?
and Laura, just to your, besides the fact that I have no sense of humor when I'm trying to run an agenda, but the rest of the time I do. But this isn't a new benefit for the teachers.
It's how to pay
totally
for it.
neutral to the teachers. It's just who's funding their existing benefit.
I understand
Okay,
that.
okay.
Right.
I don't, it's not, it would be, I'd feel differently if it was a new benefit for us.
So other than that, universal pre-K, 10 hours a week, and that should not have a major impact on us since we've been providing pre-K, not universally, but I think we should be set with that. I think those are the 3 big things.
It's kind of interesting, after all the consolidation discussions, they couldn't come up with anything. I kind of expected they'd come up with some
Right.
compromise, something, but just kind of ran
Yeah.
out of time. I assume.
I think
No.
that the Senate was going in a direction that was like so far afield from what the House was thinking about, that they decided it was better not to have anything and start the conversation over than to saddle SUs. So one of the things I think the Senate was talking about was consolidating SUs, meaning like putting a couple SUs together. So instead of consolidating governance, just put more SUs together. So still as many boards, but in larger catchment areas.
Thinking that
That doesn't-
superintendents could just, the work could be spread, and that just made no
So
sense.
in my own mind, though, I don't think this is about superintendents, but I think it is about coherence and cohesion within the system. And at some point, when you've got all of these quasi-independent, autonomous entities making their own decisions, thinking that that's going to get you a coherent system, just doesn't make sense. So I think that's kind of what happened on Saturday. They really did run out of time, but I don't know that it's dead.
I'm sure it won't be.
Yeah, so.
No, I think it raised it more clearly in people's minds that something has to be done, and I think the conversations will continue for sure, at all kinds of levels.
Right. That's what I'm hearing too.
And the financial bill ended up being a penny less on the homestead tax rate and 2 cents more on the
Non-homestead.
non-homestead. That's kind of what I'm thinking of. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on the Colt report? Okay, we're on 5.2, third quarter FMR. Bob, you have any statement you'd like to make?
Sure. You want the executive summary. You're still 57,000 to the good. The board will end up healthier than they thought they were when they put the budget together, but a little bit worse than the third quarter estimate that we gave you, $12,000 worth with changes in HR and transportation.
I'm so sorry.
Everybody touch theirs.
Thank you, that's our reminder.
You just remind me about when we end up with a surplus at the SU level, do we let it roll over? Do we give it back to boards? Or do we make that decision at our business meeting?
You make
drawing
that
a blank.
decision in the October timeframe at your business meeting. It sometimes depends on the magnitude and sometimes depends on where the surplus was generated.
Thank you. Any questions on the FMR? Okay, we're on 6.1, discussion matters, input on carousel meeting schedule for 2014-15.
Okay, so that is on the agenda because the Executive Council of the Vermont School Boards Association has their monthly meeting on the second Wednesday. That has the effect of keeping any of you from running for that office. So I'm putting it here to just see if this is something that you'd want to consider, moving your meeting date from the current one, the second Wednesday, to the second Tuesday, or the second or third Wednesday. And you have this on your agendas for all of your meetings. So this is just input. You're not making any decision tonight. I'm hoping that the board chairs pay attention. When we meet next Tuesday, we can discuss, did it seem like people were fine with that? Or are there some people who ran for board knowing that the meeting was on this particular night and that's the only night they can meet? Joan?
Elaine, when these dates are acceptable to you folks,
Yes.
especially the budget information?
This works for us.
Okay,
But
okay.
actually, we have a calendar for the budget that's totally different.
Right, but remember when we were on the first,
The
it
first-
didn't work, and so these work.
The first-
That's all I need to.
This totally works.
Okay.
Really, that was more of an issue the first was all very, very often after a school vacation, and we couldn't get the information in time, and, you know, the work that goes on behind the scenes in Sandy's office to get all of these agendas out, 6 different agendas, all the backup materials from all the principals. You know, there are a couple days in the week where that's all the work that Sandy and one other person are doing. So it matters when it is in order for us to be able to deliver, we hope, what is organized material.
Can I just clarify that?
Yeah.
We meet on the second Wednesday, right?
Yep.
The VSBA board meets on the second Wednesday, so the second Wednesday here would be status quo.
Right,
That's
I just
listed
want,
here.
yes,
Oh, okay.
exactly.
Just want to clarify.
I'm just saying,
that
those are the
would-
dates that work for us.
Oh, okay, understood.
Okay. Do you want to say more about it?
Well, sure, I mean, this is something that I've brought up a few times, and we played with it a few years ago, and it didn't quite work because the first Wednesday of the month wasn't good, and excuse me, and we completely understand that a lot of people get on the board knowing that for their family schedules, Wednesday happens to be a day that they can do community service. And so there's that complication as well. The reason I've brought it up to the board in the past is because there's so many significant issues going on in the state where that VSBA board really becomes a significant body as part of the dialogue. And it's especially apparent when you go to the VSBA, Vermont School Board Association annual meeting in October, and I know some of us have seen that, and the leadership for that VSBA board is really helping drive policy in the state. And we can have some input by having sidebar conversations and so forth, but we're not at the table when they're doing the major work. and therefore we're somewhat marginalized in the conversation. So it's, it's a challenging question for us. And do you make that change because we might have one person on our board that would be able to represent the SU in the region?
We even asked if that meeting could be moved.
And it was
it
absolutely,
can't.
there was
Yeah.
no conversation.
Well, I think part of that discussion then maybe goes to rather than doing it because somebody might want to, as opposed to should it be a designated position, from the supervisory union board that says, somebody volunteers or gets elected or appointed to go be our rep to that, and to always have somebody there as opposed to somebody feels like it,
Right.
and goes, and then one year nobody really has time or feels like it.
Right.
Yeah.
But the election happens at the regional meeting, it's not our choice.
Yeah, but it's a public meeting. Lorna was on the
No,
board.
right, anybody can go.
Right, you do have to be
but
elected.
But-
when you said, should we appoint somebody?
I'm just saying, the meetings always, I think the VSBA meetings are always on that second Wednesday, and nobody from here ever goes.
Right.
Right.
So if we were to change it, rather than just changing it because somebody might want to, should we be looking at it and saying we should, find some volunteer, but to always go?
To
And
attend,
to have
even
an
not being a
official
voting
position
member
as
if
a
they don't
designated
win.
VSBA rep
Yeah.
from
Run a-
CSA.
run a-
And sit in
candidate.
the audience. Lorna should speak to this as well. You were vice
Because I
chair.
was on the
for-
VSBA board for a long time, a number of years ago. And then recently, a couple years ago, June and I ran for president and vice president of the regional, our region, the Northeast region and the islands. And we won the election. But at the very end, I thought, gee, when are those meetings? It's like the second Wednesday. And we were not willing or able to change VSBA, so we had to drop out and submit a resignation. It was a little bit.
Or even took power.
So I think, so we're gonna discuss this, it's really important that we're not excluding an elected representative from being able to fulfill their duties by
Right.
moving this
Right.
meeting. So that's really the
Right,
key
because the
question.
expectation really is that this meeting is also the second Wednesday.
Right, so it starts here, if we find that there's nobody's being excluded from fulfilling something they ran for, office for, then we can consider moving the meeting, and then I guess it would just be a matter of if board chairs could get
Well,
some kind of consensus on when.
I think Russ is bringing up a different point.
I know, but
We
we're
don't
not
need
gonna-
to necessarily have someone elected to the board to be present at the meetings. And, I mean, we all know that someone who shows up at a meeting as an audience member on a regular basis does have somewhat of a voice.
Well,
you know,
Colleen, I
that-
wasn't talking about, I was saying that, like, I was elected by Williston, and so we shouldn't be excluding me from coming to this meeting by
Oh, no,
moving.
no,
that's
yeah,
my
I don't
point.
think
I'm
anyone
on-
was
The second
going
point I'm
there.
going to, the second point, so that's the task for tonight, is try to make sure that we're not excluding anybody if we do move it, and then the next question would be what day everybody could make it. So if
Right.
we do choose to move it.
Right.
That's
So-
exactly right.
If we could get that information,
Yeah, I don't think.
sooner rather than later, then.
Yeah, I don't think any one of us would advocate for us not showing up and doing our local duty.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
So-
So then the next question is, to Russ's point, is that we really should try to find someone who's willing to represent us, definitely at the regional, and then hopefully be elected to go to the
And I'd say
state.
we probably have half a dozen people who would,
Right. Then we don't have to make
would
that decision
consider it.
tonight. So-
But a third option could be, why not have it on a rotating basis? Maybe somebody doesn't want to leave their board every week because they can't, but, September Sue goes, October Russ goes, November Russ goes.
I don't really.
Right, that's fair.
I don't feel as comfortable with that. Are you suggesting that, like, while we're having our meeting, each month somebody is not at their board because they're?
I think it was
Yeah,
a good
if we can't
brainstorm.
change it,
brainstorm.
why not still get some exposure and get some input?
Yeah.
And
Let's see first if we can find a date
But
that can work.
I guess I don't really understand, so we're supposed to ask our board if,
Would these, I think the simple thing is to say, here are these 3 alternative dates. Do they work? And if the answer is yes, yes, and yes, that's all we need tonight, that the 3 alternative dates work. on your board, maybe one of those dates work and 2 others don't. I need to have that information, really as simple as that. It doesn't need to be
So
complicated.
really, all you want is a date where everybody on the board, it works for their schedule. That's what you
Right.
want from
Yep.
each board.
Yep.
Yes. And-
Or
and-
if there's 2 dates that it works for
Right,
everybody,
or
then you want
3.
both of those
Yes.
dates. Okay.
So you could just do a hands up, would the second Tuesday work? Yes, great. No? Okay.
Is there a preference amongst the administration for either second or third week?
Not really,
I didn't know if, there are other
Right.
meetings or
Right.
business cycle or whatever that
Right.
might make
We
one preferable
we looked
to
at
the
that as a group and felt that these 2 weeks could work.
It doesn't
And
look
looked at
like
the
there's nothing on the calendar.
Right, and we
Yeah.
looked at the calendar.
I mean, I could see in the future it becoming a problem
Right.
sometime, but then we move one. So.
Is this space available on those?
Yes. As much as it is now.
Susan's in charge of CVU, she'll make it available.
Make it so.
She schedules all the rooms.
Okay?
Final comment, I was just, if you do move it, you want to consider, would it be tough for someone to go 2 nights in a row? So, first Tuesday to
That's a good
Heinsberg,
point.
or this, and then second, then the next day go away to something, just food for thought for that. 2 nights in a row
That's a
might be
very
tough
good
to get
point.
away
Sounds
from.
like negotiations and then our regular meeting.
So, food for thought.
Okay.
Good point.
6.2, retreat.
All right, so I put in the board packet a retreat outline, and already it has changed a little bit, and it will continue to change based on input. So there will be input from you guys tonight, and then I'll bring this to the board chairs, and then I'll put out a final outline. Conceptually, the idea is that the morning is for the locals, the afternoon is for the SU. There is the topic of technology integration that I think we would benefit hearing all of us. And so I was trying to plug that in, and you'll see in the version that you have in the board packet, I kind of plugged that like 2/3 of the way through the morning and dragged you all back together and did technology and then sent you all back to do work plans. And when I brought this to the lead meeting on Monday, they thought that was a little discombobulated. They prefer to have, let's do all the local stuff that is strictly just local, then do tech integration, and have lunch. So that's what I'm playing with now. And the tech integration piece will be, it won't just be let's have a conversation. I'll do an overview of, here are the salient points from the audit report. Here are some things that we're thinking about. Here's what I then want you as a local board to go back with your administration and do this process. And then we'll come back and I'll share. So everybody will hear what everyone's doing, and that'll be great so that at the SU board meeting in the afternoon, when we look at, well, okay, what's our goal around this? We've heard all of that. So that's the piece around the outline. I think all the major pieces that we'll be doing are on there. And then the other piece that we'll be doing at each of the locals is determining what those board discussion items are. And so far, and you'll hear from the cult person that's at your board meeting tonight, what those discussion items are for your board. That's based on conversations with you, the board chairs, individually during the last agenda prep meeting, and conversations with the administration at the school. So tonight, it isn't to like, oh, we want 3 more discussion items, right? We really, 2 or 3 discussion items is enough. But we want to make sure that we got the right ones. So tonight is to make sure, like, this is what we've got for your particular board. Is that the right topic? Is there something else hanging out there that we need to wrap our heads around as a retreat topic? Questions about that? Okay. That's it. And a reminder again, of course, that all board members are invited to stay for the CSSU. And all your input is valuable and appreciated.
If you could pass that on to the extended board, that would be great. Okay, action matters, 7.1, special education assessment. So, after discussing this for the last, I don't know, 8 years, 4 meetings maybe?
Certainly in depth the last few months.
We had asked for a recommendation on what assessment metric to use, and the recommendation is ADM. And, let's see, can I have a motion to accept the Colt recommendation of using ADM for special education assessments?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
So any discussion around this? I'm all choked up on it. No discussion.
I just really appreciate the thought that's gone into it. It seems like a simple question initially, but it was quite complex.
We thought, we were just talking about it today, we thought it was really complex initially, and we're amazed at how by having the conversation over a 6-month period, dividing it up into pieces of information and discussion items, that pretty much, I mean, this is our recommendation, but we believe that it mirrors what any of you would have said.
I just want to note that there are winners and losers in all
Right.
3 options. And, and I agree, I think that ADM makes a lot of sense, as you were explained here. But I feel for Shelburne and Charlotte, because this would be a significant hit for them. And I didn't know whether we could take our extra money and lend it to Charlotte. I mean, it just doesn't.
Yeah, and I would agree with you if this was static, but what we don't have the information to know is it may swing $100,000 the other direction once we have the plans next year.
Right, that's true.
So you know what, I don't know if we can even do this, because it's like looking out the rear view mirror, but, we could pick a year, like maybe 4 years ago, when in Charlotte, they would have been the big winners, because of the individual students that were there.
Right.
We could pick another year, and Heinsberg would be the big winner. So that's the fluidity of all of this. It really depends on who are these students. By pooling it all together, we get rid of that. Over time, we don't have that big fluctuation that schools have had to deal with.
How did we, when budgets were developed for next fiscal year, what were the assumptions we made?
For this coming year, we're doing it the same way, because
So
those
is
service.
this for fiscal 2015-16?
Right.
Yes.
It could even look different than it does now when we get there, because it's going to be based on the service plan that's being developed starting this summer.
And I know that we discussed it, I just need to be reminded, what was the what was the answer to whether or not it could be staggered in over 2 years, phased in over 2 years? It's,
What is it you want to stagger?
or just, being sensitive to the hit to Shelburne and Charlotte, for example. Not that,
Honestly, you can do anything you want, because it's within your control. So if you want to take 10 years to get there, or 5 years to get there, you can invent a formula. The only thing you're going to do is you're going to confuse the hell out of yourselves and confuse the hell out of Megan, I, and Mike as you go on kind of a complicated journey. But we can, Colleen, in answer to your question, we can do anything the board chooses to do.
okay, I just wanted to
Yep.
make sure we understood that.
Did these numbers, and there again, I looked at them several times, I should know, were these net of revenue, the hits, or were they just expense?
The revenue was allocated by a single method.
So it is the total. Well, we have a motion to accept the recommendation on ADM. We're ready to vote? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. I have a motion, I assume we're accepting the calendars that we're doing?
Yeah.
Could I have a motion to accept the K through 8 and 9 through 12 calendars as they are in your packet?
So moved.
Thank you, Russ.
Second.
Thank you, Kathy. Any discussion?
I have just one thing to say. So the K-8 calendar in your packet has all the right color designation, but if you look at January 2, which is blue, which indicates professional development, the words underneath that don't say that, and we've corrected that on the formal calendar.
This is the last one. This is the last one.
Yeah,
I didn't
and that's
see that.
9/12. It's the K-8. So it's exactly the calendar. This is the 175 days. It's the regional calendar plus then our own professional development days that we discussed last month, there was no input to cause us to change it.
Any other questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? You abstain? 7.3, policy adoption. Can I have a motion to accept the adopt? Are we adopting? Adopting the food service operations policy E15.
So moved.
Thank you, Joan. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Kathy.
Just a procedural question. Can we do that without having discussed when it's policy?
Did not go to the policy committee.
No, I know, but
Well, that's
so I
a
know
good
some
question.
things you don't have to have in discussion matters. In a policy adoption, you don't have to have a month before as a discussion.
So we could, but to your point, Kristen, we could adopt it here and then not adopt it at the K-8s, or at the locals, is that what you're?
No, I
But that could happen tonight, right?
Yes, and yes. Or no. I think yes and no. You don't have to have a discussion, and yes, that could happen, and it has happened before.
We discussed this a little bit at, not this week's meeting, but the prior week's meeting, and it had been in the Colt report the prior month that Mike and I were working with your auditor to finish language appropriate to do this, so you all knew about it in April, and we felt comfortable that we could bring it back for you to approve in May. If you're uncomfortable with that sequence, by all means, move it out one more month and look at it formally again in June, but we thought we'd provided enough insight that the intent was covered.
The policy was warned, and that's the only.
Can I make
Good
some
question,
comments on the
Kristen.
appropriateness
Yes,
of the
please.
policy?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
that's where I was-
I'm the author behind all of this. What this does is formalize what you've all now done as boards for the last 2 years, which is when you run a deficit in your local food service operation, you give serious consideration to covering it as quickly as you can. 10 years ago, that was not the generally accepted behavior on the part of boards. When they ran a deficit in food service, they would ignore it, hoping that it would somehow disappear, magically go away. They didn't, and when it got to a certain level, as it did in a couple of schools, the auditor would bring that up as not best fiscal practice, and you as boards would take care of it. Since you're all evidencing good quality fiscal behavior the last 2 years, we thought we'd formalize the practice in board policy, so it's done as part of Mike's work when he draws a close to each year to cover deficits to the extent they can be covered by your general fund. You, in essence, you do it locally. You don't, when your food service runs a deficit, you don't tell your food service director to stop writing checks or stop buying food. The general fund covers the operation and keeps it going. What this does is just formally follows up with that cash process in a manner that makes financial sense. So that's why it's here, is to just kind of get in place good behavior formalized.
So I had a question about, so you'd be paying it out of the general fund, the shortfall? Is that-
To the extent the general fund is running a sufficient surplus to cover it,
Hence my
yes.
question, so explain that.
The deficit won't be covered if there's no money to cover it with.
Because you can only spend, the board can only take an action to spend up to the budget that was authorized by
Correct.
voters.
Yep.
You might overspend because you have to on special ed or something, but you can't make a decision.
Yeah, this kind of board transfer, if the money isn't there, the auditor will catch it in April, and we'll have to reverse it anyway. So, and Mike understands that completely, more so than the rest of us. So that's kind of the practice that will be put in place. If the money is there to do it, it'll be formally done.
Now, is this completely tying the hands of the board? They have to do this, or could, this is the policy, could the board, I can't think of a reason why you wouldn't necessarily, but could the board choose not to execute this way if they needed to for some
Wow.
reason?
I guess they could, but I wouldn't necessarily bring it to their attention to make that sort of decision. But yes, I mean, it's
I'm not, I'm not advocating going against our policies, but it's not a legal state thing, so.
No, this is done locally.
But it is saying we have to do it,
Saying it's our policy to do it.
yes.
But you can violate your policies.
It's more of a.
You can
If you
choose
want,
to
I mean, you
accept the
should.
policies, yeah.
Well, if there were a situation that the
More
food
of a
service.
guideline than a
de-
rule.
Or that they know something is gonna change in the next year.
Next year, right.
And don't put it in, or they could pay back. I mean, we can work with it when the situation arises, I think.
Okay, any other questions? So I'm not hearing a motion, anybody wants to table this or anything, so should we just lean in and vote on it and?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Every year.
Ayes have it. 7.4, can I have is this authorizing me to sign things over the
Yes.
Okay. Can I have a motion to authorize the board chair to sign
Any new hire contracts, that's what it's for, really.
over the summer?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Kristen. Any discussion on that?
That's gonna be on every single agenda that we do this time of year. It just keeps the wheels moving forward. This is hiring time, and we have to wait to get a quorum of the board together. We can lose candidates, sometimes it does get to that point, so. Just a reminder that anybody that is hired with the board chair's signature authority all comes back for formal approval in September, or for reaffirmation. I guess that's the better way of saying it, in September. So you will know, all of you, who Jean may have signed for, which at the SU, very unlikely that that would happen. but-
Especially.
Oh.
Must be signing a lot of them.
That will change. won't it?
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Have a motion to accept the consent agenda, which is everything except 8.4, which we just voted on. So moved. Thank you, Kathy. Any
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Luna. I'm kidding, go ahead.
Okay. I was impressed by the number of special ed appointments. And I didn't know whether that was the average, and of course, it's all done centrally now, so.
Right, so
I understood-
you'll start
That's
seeing
why.
Right,
this.
so, but I didn't know whether, it just seemed like a lot. And I was, I raised my
Any sense
eyebrows
of
and
that?
said,
Yeah, there are a couple of those hires that are just retirements, typical attrition, but a number of them, 4 of them at least, are due to service delivery model changes. Through the CPU, 2 of them at Shelburne, and so that's a movement toward using professional staff to provide intervention, and those hires are based on reductions in the use of PRS in both buildings. So it is a slightly higher number for that reason.
okay, thank you.
Okay, 9.0, confirm next meeting date, so hopefully we'll see everyone at the retreat on May 30th. It's a Monday, right?
Friday.
Friday, thank you. The business meeting, if you remember the business meeting, we do kind of all together to go through all the things, and then we separate out to vote, so one big meeting for all the boards on June 25th, and the board chair meeting on May 20th. And with that, we'll move to the common topic.
Right on time, Madam Chair.
Good job, Kevin. It was the elbow to the side that was getting me though. Told you.
Yes.
It is.
I'm trying to see.
It is my 5th time talking to you about ECAP results. And also, this is the final presentation of ECAP results because ECAP goes away for a specific content area, just reading, writing, and math, and SBAC takes over. So next spring, as opposed to fall, next spring, SBAC will be implemented for the first time, and I don't know exactly what the results look like, how they're given to us, do we get national results, comparisons? Right now, I'm not sure, but we certainly will come back to you with whatever that looks like once we analyze it. So on that note, I always do this in 2 parts. I want to talk a little bit about the context of assessment, how we use assessment, why it's so critical to what we do, and has become even more so, and then the details of our results. So, assessment, of course, drives all kinds of things, and for us, that's increased over the last 5 years. But certainly, it plays into planning instruction, revising instruction, differentiating for groups of students. It drives intervention and what we do for our tangled up learners. It also drives professional development. One of the reasons we're in a deep professional development project for going on 6 years now is because of the results that we had some time ago, 5 years ago. And it drives action planning. Thanks. So it's awfully important. Generally speaking, though, we don't look at assessment results from one source. We almost always triangulate, or more than triangulate, in that we usually use data from a number of sources to look at, specifically when you're looking at a child and you're thinking about their progress. One source is just that, and it's important to look at it from several perspectives. So it's rare for us to gather and just talk about just one genre of results, but it's too much for us to talk about everything on one night. So we do, but I want to clarify that in a school system, in a data team meeting, these show up along with a student's level of reading in the BAS, and along with their learning results from classroom formative assessments. So it's unusual from that perspective. For me, some of you have seen this, this image before that I've used, but anywhere along the line, these pieces of instruction, assessment, differentiation, data teams, and professional development are interwoven, also interconnected, and driven by data depending on when you have it. But if you start with instruction and you drive this way, there's going to be assessment at some point, and that is going to lead you to some structural revision, naturally. That data also leads us to think about professional development and revising or keeping going with what we're doing there. So these are overlapping and affect one another, but assessment results clearly help drive many of those elements, all of those elements. This is another way of looking at the impact of assessment, only it's on a calendar. And we're going to I revised it a bit to represent what's coming with SBAC, which is much more of a spring. But you can see around the horn, we have 3 very explicit benchmark common assessment periods when specific data, K-8, is collected in common. It's reviewed in a data team. We're going to begin a fall report out to you on our indicators, largely our common local assessment. Where we're going to fit SBAC in, we're not quite sure yet. And so data continues to drive instruction, and then we get another collection period. These collection periods are the more formal times, and then in between, of course, classroom teachers are using all kinds of formative daily assessments that drive their planning that very night. For SBAC, there are going to be 3 months of implementation. That's really different from NECAP, which has a 3-week window. So for 3 months, that will be occurring. And then the board retreat comes along. Also, during this time, schools are involved in action planning and thinking about the data, particularly what we analyze in the fall, and how that ought to impact their action plans school-wide. So at the board retreat, you hear reflection on the action plan from the year before and going forward what that looks like. We'll analyze SBAC sometime in the summer, I think, so that I can get a handle on what the new results look like and how they're given to us. We hear about our AYP determination later in the summer. That plays in, and all of that then starts the year and plays into revisions in the action plan and launching the school year. So you can see assessment plays a very big part. A little bit about NECAP, even though this is the last year, we're about to look at those results over time. So just so you know, the NECAP stands for the New England Common Assessment Program. This is the 9th year of the NECAP program. 4 New England states participate: New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, and Vermont. What is not going away is the science NECAP, and that happens, actually our schools are in the midst of it. The window just opened, and we're doing that right now. You'll still see science results, and theoretically, though I don't know this officially, that will end 2016, and there'll be another national level test representative of the new standards in science, but that's to come. And then a reminder as we go forward and look at these that since math, writing, and reading are assessed in the fall, so you're going to look at progress from 2013 fall. What that implies is the instruction from the spring prior and also the accumulated knowledge. But science is different. When we look at that, that's done in the spring, and it represents all of the instruction from that year. So we have to remember that as we look at these results. And lastly, just a little context around us and our demographics, and also some things going on in the state. So 27 schools participated in an official NECAP pilot. We participated in a field test the year before, and some schools, 27, participated in this pilot. So they were exempt from the fall NECAP, and therefore our state comparisons are skewed. And a letter from the agency recommended, actually said, do not compare your results to the state this year for that reason, because it's all off kilter. So I won't have that tonight for you. Some of our own information, we're now 4,088 strong, K-12. The NECAP, of course, is a 3rd grade to 8th and then an 11th grade test. We are at 16% of our students living in poverty, 11% are on an IEP, and 2.9% are English language learners. So we're going to get into the results, but before I do, I want you to know that in your packet, which I needed to submit to Sandy a week ahead, I gave you a shrimpy version. Partly it's a paper issue, and partly I'm still working on it at that point. So you have the shrimpy version, and I've revised it about 42 times since then. So look up here, even though you have that. And another reminder, your input last year said, you know, it's too hard to see the percentages on the screen, which I agree, although I've always had them up there. So you have some of the percentages in front of you, but I don't. I took them off because really I want to talk to you about big picture. And I can talk with you at another time if you have questions about percentages and those kinds of things. But I don't have that in front of me right now, but of course I used that as I analyzed the data, okay? So what I'll do is we'll look at reading, math, a history over time, and then I'll rivet down into reading, writing, math, and science. And just so you understand how NECAP is reported, it's reported as a 3 for proficiency, as a 4 for proficient with distinction, and down here for partially proficient, and the 1s are substantially below. And then I just want to talk to you a little bit about analysis and data, and you know, it's the graduate courses you've taken, so this is really summarized. But a change less than 3% is pretty much insignificant when you're looking at data of this size and this genre. So we want to be careful, and we will be, because I will talk to you about changes that are more significant than that, or I wouldn't mention them to you. But it's important for you to know that when you're looking at the pages that I did give you. And the other thing to note is that you want to look at changes over time. NECAP was designed as a large-scale look at a system, a whole school system, a supervisory union, and a school. And to do that, if you only look at 1 year at a time, you're looking at a group of students here, and then you might look at an entirely different set of results, but they represent a different group of students. So what we want to do, to caution ourselves from getting frantic over 1 year's results, is look for a 3-year trend, and then we have something to think about. We have something to think about instructionally and curriculum-wise, programmatically, those kinds of things. So that's what we'll look for as we go along tonight. So this is a history from 2008. And what your takeaway, I imagine, would be is that for 3rd and 8th graders, reporting on proficient and above is a very solid line in reading. And in math, it's quite solid as well, and math tends to come in just a bit beneath reading every single time, though we're working really hard on that. So the takeaway here is, in both programs for 3rd and 8th grade, it's a very strong line. Things are strong, consistent, and cohesive across grades and over a long time. That's a very good sign. 11th grade, you see the first thing you notice is that they have a gap between their reading performance and their math performance, and that's something we look at. Across the state, our high schools have that gap, but in some places it's smaller than this one. So that's an area that we're concerned about and we're thinking about, and I'll talk more about it as we get into the math section. But that's the big takeaway is, again, very strong and consistent, but that gap is there. So.
Well, I think you also say that we're not budging the needle.
Say that again.
We're not moving that needle, we're not.
We haven't moved that needle significantly in the upper grades, that's true. We have in some content areas, which I'm not going to show you, but.
But even in the other ones, I mean, the line's pretty flat.
It
so
is.
Are you going to talk about what you're going to, how you're going to tackle that last
Yeah.
20%?
Yeah, I will talk with you toward the end about some of the things we're doing to do that. I will say, and it's not an excuse in any way, but the better your performance, the harder it is to inch it up. And it's not to say we're not trying, but it's hard work. But I will be talking, there are a couple slides about what we're doing to work on those exact questions. So let's dig into reading a little bit. First part, I'll compare our reading with some comparable school districts, so they've shuffled a little bit because some don't have data this year. And then I'm going to talk about some cohort data, and then I have been disaggregating the last few years so that we can look at what's going on for our students who live in poverty and our students who are on IEPs. Cohort data, I'll talk about when we get there, but that's a really good way to look at data, a very valid way to look at it. So let's have a look at comparables. This is 3rd through 8th. CSSU scores top some other comparable school districts. And we're thrilled about that. 84% of our 3rd through 8th graders achieve proficient and above.
Is CBU top, statewide or just in this group of cohorts?
It's just compared to these districts.
So just compared to those?
Yeah, because I can't compare to the state this year on a whole. Normally I would.
No, I meant all districts.
They didn't all districts take the assessment this year because all those schools that she mentioned before piloted the.
Right. Are these the only districts that we have results for in the state? is my question.
No, there are many others, but I tried to find districts that have some similarities to ours demographically.
Okay, great,
Just
thank
to
you.
make it be as close to apples and apples as I can.
Molly?
Okay.
Quick
Yes.
question. Who's LSSU?
Lemoyle South.
Thank you.
And then for the high school, you can see that Stowe was first, Montpelier second. And you'll note that, and you might remember from last year, you might not, that's fine, but CBU waffles, sometimes they've been second, sometimes they've been third, sometimes they're not on the radar. So, you know, that's something for us to think about, the fact that it isn't consistent. Consistency is a good thing, by and large. So I want to talk about cohort data, and then you'll see it in each content area. Cohort data is great, and we could only begin to do it as we have many years of collected data. But what it does is, and why it's so valid and important, is that it looks at, this is this year's 8th grade class taking the NECAP in the fall, and it traces that exact same group's performance all the way back to 3rd grade. And I take out from that data any students who came in during one of those grades and any students who left. So this is our group of kids that we influenced with our instruction. Another reason for doing that. So again, and you'll notice again, it's the same thing. We're solid as a rock, but I want to point out the area where we're not. and that is those performing with distinction. So we have here 23% more students in this cohort score with distinction than they did in 3rd grade. So while as a whole we haven't leapt up, that's a great sign. I feel like that, I don't feel like it, that is improvement, and that's what we want to see over time, and it gradually builds. So happy to see that. And we have an 11th grade cohort, so this is this year's 11th graders, and we track them back to 5th grade and look at what goes on. And we have 12% more students who score with distinction by 11th grade than we did as 5th graders. And a pretty solid line in reading again. So CSSU is producing confident, strong readers consistently. So before I get into some charts that disaggregate and help us look at our students who live in poverty and our students who are on an IEP, I just want to talk a little bit about the gap and the effect. So this next chart will help us, but I want you to understand the terms, which I imagine you do, but I have been asked in the past to be sure that I talk about those. So SES is socioeconomic status. And we tend to think of phrase that our students who live in poverty are in the low SES bracket. And an IEP, when I refer to that, that's students who have an individualized education plan. Okay. So this next slide is going to show you the effect of having an IEP or living in poverty on learning and performance. So this pink line is this is the performance of only students in ESU. I just did 3rd through 8th grade in reading as a sample. And this is all a little bit more severe for math, but what this shows you is all of our students who are not living in poverty and do not have an IEP, and that is their performance. This is all of our students together, none of whom have an IEP. This is our students, none of whom live in poverty. This is all of our students. Those who live in poverty, those who do not, those on an IEP, those who are not. So already you can see what happens. Students only who live in poverty, there's the gap that we're talking about. And I call it the poverty effect. And you can see what happens even more severely for students who have an IEP. What happens. And then you can see what happens if you have both of those factors going on. So this is to paint the picture about why we're working so hard to change that. Because these kiddos have far less of a chance than others. Okay, so these are ribbon graphs, and they help you get a broad picture. And I thought after some input last year, it might be easier for us to look at these and talk about our takeaways than to analyze every little percentage, though I did that. But what this shows you is students who are not living in poverty in 3rd through 8th grade and 11th grade. You can see some consistency and some climbing, and I'm happy to tell you this, you can see the effects of a tremendous amount of focus with our teachers, PD, having consultants come, shining a light on what we should be doing for these students. You can see the effect of that work. You can see what's going on for 11th graders who live in poverty, and you can see that for 3rd and 8th graders. So this is a point of pride. It's not to say we're finished, because we won't ever be, but and we have tons more work to do, and it's complicated. This is complicated work. It's also changing our whole culture and the way we think about students who struggle. So it's complicated, but we're getting there.
What was the big 2009 dip?
For students, I don't know exactly what that was, whether that was a unique group of students. I'm not sure.
No, I can remember that. I think we just had some student engagement issues that year that Sean stepped in and took some action to get high school kids to pay more attention, is what I remember in 2000.
Yep. Okay. I think that was my first year here,
Do you take credit? Is that
actually. No. It takes a village. But thank you. So IEP, the IEP effect. So the very first thing you notice probably is this gap is a lot bigger than the last slide's gap between those who, in this case, don't have an IEP and those who do. So this is a bigger bridge to build right here. Again, though, you see our work is just more gradual. You see some improvements here for grade 11. You see some improvements here for 3 through 8. I'm not sure if we have a trend or if this is an anomaly. That's the kind of thing we have to wait and see and have a look at. But, you know, the good news is our effort and our raising consciousness about this is working. We just have quite a long way to go. So, summary. I don't think I'll read each summary slide to you because you can have this entire packet if you request it at the end of tonight. I think the big takeaways are those changes in our students living in poverty, those students who are on an IEP, and the pretty significant achievement of our 3rd through 8th graders who really excel in CSSU beyond other comparable schools. So let's go into writing. So the thing about writing is kneecap writing is only given at 5th, 8th, and 11th grades. So we don't have the same cohort potential. We don't have quite the same amount of data. So again, I'm going to do the exact same slide configuration. So this is 5th grade, excuse me, 5th grade students. And next to South Burlington, who performed the highest, came Chittenden South in writing. I want to stop right here and say something about 5th grade writing, because last year and the year before, on my list of things I'm worried about was 5th grade writing. I said it to you for 3 years straight. And literacy coordinators, some of whom are over here, know that we talked about 5th grade. What goes on with 5th grade? What is wrong? We practiced. And tonight, as we move along through writing, you're going to see some results from all that emphasis. So we'll just keep going here. 8th grade writing. CSSU's 8th grade writing has continuously been higher than the rest of our grades, and also almost always dominates the comparable town performances. Excuse me. We have 11th grade writing. The takeaway from this slide is we have, you know, schools are performing kind of all over the place. Usually it's a little more consistent. And you can see again that this year CVU hasn't placed beside some of her competing towns.
Molly, does that happen? Do we have that big of a drop usually from 8th to 11th grade?
We do. We do, yes. It's not always as extreme, but we generally do have a drop. And we've talked other years, you probably remember, about the tricky part of 11th grade testing, because they're hit with so many other tests. Kneecap tends to slide to a lower value place. And it's something that the high school has been thinking about. Now it's the end of kneecap, and I think we will start an entire new emphasis and culture around SBAC. But to answer your question more simply, yeah, it generally has been below.
So if I could just interject that for those people who will not be at the CVU board meeting and will not see the full presentation that Jeff will do there, he will share the CVU data, but he will, on kneecap, but he'll also share how the CVU students do on SATs, on ACTs, on plans, and that is universally very good. And so it causes us to look at the CVU data and say, exactly as Molly said, what's the investment there?
Do all the kids take SATs?
No, but a good number of our
Is that a
kids do.
selection bias? So obviously better students who take
Yeah.
those.
You know, I can tell you that personally, I'm trying to think how many years ago when we were doing the Red Merger study and Chris Capsalis was very interested in this. He asked to look at the same students. So those kids that are scoring like top score on SAT and AP and whatever, how did they do on their kneecaps? And some of them, it was, remember this? I did totally ridiculous. Like they weren't even proficient on the kneecap, and they were the top scorers on some of these others. So there really is an issue. It makes it very difficult to know how to read this at the high school level. For some of these schools, they include it on their transcript. I mean, some schools actually do some very significant things to say, hey, we care how this looks. So
Right.
those are some of the alternatives. I just know that there are a bunch of people in this room who will hear the full presentation, and there are a bunch who will only hear this part, so it's important to provide that
But I remember
context.
about 4 years ago when science at the high school dropped to an all-time low. And I worked with the science department chair, who then worked with the teachers there. And all we did, for starters, and then the next year we did more, was to elevate the importance with the teachers, to have the test taken, implemented by the teacher of those students. So the students taking that science, it sat with their teacher when they took it instead of someone else proctoring, and go over test-taking skills. At the time, Adam was here, and I went through the results with him, and we looked at the majority of the results and mistakes had to do with testing, and just kind of careless, whatever. So he went through that with his teachers. They talked to their students about it in that year. So there clearly are some things culturally that could happen there. And I think we'll start a whole, as I said, a whole new generation of test-taking emphasis with SBAC.
I was just going to comment on the SBAC piece. I remember a few years ago, we were just talking about how, and my son was younger, I heard it from his peers, that they really dismissed the kneecap test because it didn't count for anything. And I'm just wondering if the SBAC, because of the adaptive element to it, if the questions change depending on how students are scoring, that it might be more interesting for students, and that may keep them engaged, perhaps. And I'm wondering if we're doing any other kind of adaptive or gaming assessment in the schools.
Well, more and more, I think classroom teachers are embedding electronics as they do their informal assessments as they go along. But as in terms of a wholesale emphasis, I think right now SBAC is, actually the ELL testing that goes on in New England, that's now become computer adaptive. So there are, I think it's gradually that's all you're going to see. But we expect quite a dip initially in SBAC. Because the rigor of it from the samples we've looked at, we're still in the process of implementing Common Core, and so I imagine, which is typical in research, there's going to be a dip in implementation and then hopefully a curve up. But I do want to show you this slide because grade 11 writing has done nothing but improve over time. And that's a great sign, and they're not that far away from 8th grade, which has topped the state many years in a row. So I'm happy to see that, and I think they are working on it. And I really want to bring attention to 5th grade writing. You can see where we were 3 years ago, and that trajectory that's enormous progress. 10% just since last year, which is just great. We're
Do you know
happy.
what
And
happened
15
between
points since 3 years ago.
2010 and 2011 with 5th grade? Because it looks like it was high.
It was high,
2008,
and it was high here
2010.
too. And I am not sure whether, now I do want to tell you, and we're not sure about this, but it's not been all that regular, but about every 5 years, some grades don't take a writing, and the state, this won't happen anymore, but the state would take the writing, get input from teachers, and completely modify. And the whole state, I recall in 2010, 5th and 8th graders did a whole lot better that next year after the test was modified. But then we kind of came apart, so I'm not sure what was going on. I'm not sure.
Well, that's a problem with, that we have at the high school too. You can't, it's hard to compare, it's hard enough to compare one class to another class, but you're comparing one test to another test. It's a different
Right.
prompt, it may be more rigorous.
Right.
And so it's, if it's a good
So-
test and you can track
right.
it, it's great, but sometimes it's, you have to compare it to, everybody else in the state also dropped by 20 points that year.
Right. That's why it's always been helpful to have those charts where we can look at what happens statewide. We can better understand what goes on for us, and sometimes, largely, in fact, I think across all areas, we've been ahead of the state. And I'm sure this year, again, were we to have that data point, we as well.
Do teachers teach or train to the test?
Well, that would be verboten. I mean, that would not be okay. Because it should be a test of all that accumulated knowledge, right? And so, however, because NECAP became the vigorous test that it was, and in fact, SBAC looked at our NECAP as an example of a test that mirrors very nicely instruction. So after the first years in, NECAP literally provided us, still did, and we've reviewed them this year even, release tasks. So it's not the whole test. It's usually about 4 of the extended tasks. There's an extended writing prompt in writing, there's an extended prompt in math, and there are extended prompts in science and in reading. And they release those, once the test is all taken, they release those to review with your students, to talk about, to try again, to practice on. Partly, the idea is it's very good instruction. These aren't measly little old dumb prompts. They're really good. So we feel great about doing that. And certainly, it's not something you wouldn't want your students to do anyway. So, and again, it's a little piece. So what they're learning from that is the manner in which they're expected to write under pressure, to use writing as an example. But no, I can't say they teach to the test.
But they are to the test, because they're teaching to what the test is asking them to ultimately do.
Right, but content and how the question is asked, that kind of thing, particularly content, that wouldn't be okay.
Right.
But you want, to some extent, a test to be testing your instruction. So if there weren't a good match up there, teachers would say, oh, forget this doesn't matter a bit, I don't even teach like that. So it's good that there's a line up there, really good. We're hoping SBAC will feel that way as well. Okay, so the cohort data that we do have, that's our current 8th graders, in 5th grade. And again, happy to see that 19% more students achieved with distinction in 8th grade than they did in 5th grade. That's a good sign. We like to see that. And for our 11th grade cohort, you can see that's current 11th grade, back to seeing them as 5th graders. So it's not a perfect straight line. It's not a perfect every year getting better. But what did get better was the number of students who achieved with distinction. So work to do.
But not to be trite, but you keep talking about distinction, but our below proficient is staying pretty much the same the whole way through.
Yeah, unless this bumps up, then this stays pretty much the same. But on things like the 3rd through 8th grade reading, this was consistent, but therefore so was that. Yeah. I mean, we've made some dents. They don't show up on such a huge scale of as you can imagine, a graph, but we have, made some great strides here, but not in every area. So again, disaggregating for low socioeconomic versus not. And you can see here for writing that the gap isn't as big, for one thing. And you can also see what happened with grade 5 more dramatically. And you can see that, we're a little worried here. We're not really sure what's going on. So these help us get a ballpark picture, but certainly this stands out here, and also this kind of solid grade 8 performance for students who are low SES. Really happy to see this line for the 5th grade. And students on an IEP, again, the thing that jumps out at you is the discrepancy is bigger by a long shot. You can see some work that has gone on here. Again, it's reflected in the 5th grade score across the board. Okay, so in terms of a summary, I'd say most notable is that improvement in 5th grade, which then, of course, gradually is going to affect 8th grade, is hopefully going to work its way up. The 8th grade is significantly higher than comparable schools and has been for quite some time. That our students in 5th grade living in poverty improved quite a bit. Our students in 5th grade on an IEP, their performance improved quite a bit. One thing I want to say about all of these content areas, and certainly true in writing, is that with the advent of Common Core, which we've been gradually implementing for the last 2 years, the rigor and the standards are different. And so even though we're seeing some successes and then some places to work, this is absolutely not the time for us to let up. There's actually a lot to be done. So each of the content areas has certain pressing points that we're working very hard on to implement new and more rigorous standards.
Molly, on the IEP ribbon,
Yep.
I mean, for those kids is, the important metric would be is if they're getting better year to year.
Yes.
As a percentage, right?
Right.
Because they're taking a harder test every year.
Exactly.
There's reasons to assume that most of them are not going to be able to achieve with proficiency. So success would be the gap is narrowing? Or-
Yep, that the gap would be narrowing and looking at that, and then, though we can't show it to you because the N is too small, that's the group size in that disaggregated group, but would be at our school level, and us at the central office to begin looking, and we are at specific student growth. And that happens in data teams, it happens in groups who gather and figure out what interventions ought to look like. They're looking at a student or a group of students over time and what's happening for them. But I can't project that because the group's too small. Yep.
To that end, you said some statistic earlier, like 16% of our kids are poverty challenged?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay.
Yes.
So I know you focused a lot on the 5th grade and up, but for 1 through 3, and I don't expect a full explanation of what you're doing specifically, but there's programs in school, but if 16% of those kids are in poverty, do those programs extend to the parents? Because I know a lot of what happens in school gets sent home in folders for parents to work, and if that's where it's dropping off the table, you know, what do we do? And we don't have so much control over at home, but I'm just wondering, are there things in place? Because if you capture them in that, I would assume in that age group, you're going to gradually see some of those proficiency numbers bump up that you want.
Absolutely. So lots of things to address there. One is there is a lot going on because of our study and emphasis on students living in poverty in particular. A lot going on for very young children. And the research is all about the limited vocabulary that they come with to school compared with their peers,
Right.
and what a detriment that is to all of their learning. So short of telling you lots of the things going on, I want you to be assured there are quite a few programs that are targeting the things that we know those particular students are arriving with.
But are they targeting the parent? Are they
Well-
targeting, see, that's my thing. I wonder if, and in those cases of early ed, and I'm talking specifically 2, 3, you know, that first, second, third, beginner skills. We may be talking about educating a parent as much as educating a child. So,
well, I can tell you that that's one reason the preschool bill went through. I mean, everybody's worried about what goes on for those children in a home that might be deficit. I can't say that we have a gangbusters program at this point to educate our parents. There's lots of parent education that goes on no matter what from a classroom, outside of sending things home, around informing people of what's best practice and what would help your child in newsletters and conferences and those kinds of things. But so short of really creating a parent education program and hoping people come to that, you know, I think that
I guess this is
folks
gonna
are-
sound so harsh, so excuse me for saying it this way. But if we're spending our money or budget items on IEPs, and if they're getting into the grade school and it's really draining on some of the budgets, then I would think if there's IEPs at that level in the beginning, again, at the beginner levels, that it would be worthwhile to have a parent training aspect to it as well.
Well, I would have to say that there is. I
Yeah?
just can't say that we have a massive CSSU parent training program going. Do you want to say?
Right, yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about quite a few times in sort of Holt reports and hasn't been a common topic but has been presentations, there's actually quite an extensive amount of work being done on early education in general in CSSU. We have an early education leadership team with pulling together folks looking at this from a lot of different angles, and that idea of outreach, of finding students, working with families, all of our schools host a number of opportunities for families of very young children to come into the school to learn about literacy, to learn about math, to learn about what we expect of their students when they come into kindergarten. And there's real work being done in those areas, so I really wouldn't want the message to be that there isn't a pretty strong emphasis, because not just we, but the rest of the state and the country agree with what you're saying in terms of where we need to invest. So I think there's a lot of work being done in that area. And specific to students on IEPs, we're also having a lot of conversations about how do we take the multi-tiered systems of support that we talk about here a lot for school-age kids, and how do we think about that for students who are of preschool age. And there's some pretty exciting partnerships that are starting between our K-8 schools and community-based child care centers. So I know you're kind of talking about K-1, 2. I think our emphasis is even younger than that. So there is a lot of work to be done, and it'll take some time before I think we see the results related to that.
Thank you.
So a look at math. We'll do some of the same slides, and then I want to get into a conversation about what's going on at the 8th grade level. We have a shift in what we're doing there. This is just big picture to look at 3rd through 8th grade math and math at 11th grade, which is kind of bumpy. That would be your takeaway, not as consistent as we might want to see. And here we have comparables for the 3rd through 8th grade students, proficient and above. You can see that CSSU is second in this demographic comparison. And this is 11th grade. So 52% of CVU's 11th graders achieved proficient and above. That's lower than last year, so they didn't come into that top 3 as they have in the past. And again, I want to say that over the years that I've been talking to you about 11th grade results, they have vacillated, whereas the 3rd through 8th grade results are pretty consistent. So math at the high school over the last couple years has, for all of these reasons, become quite a focus point. And I'll talk to you about that in a minute at the next cohort slide. But here, again, is a cohort. This is the current 8th graders and what they look like in 3rd grade and what occurred over time. A slight increase from 3rd grade to 8th grade in students proficient and above. Again, this is demonstrating a strong, consistent program. How to bump that up is what we're working on. And here is the 11th grade cohort. So this is pretty telling. You know, this shows what happens for those current 11th graders in 5th grade. Strong, 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 and then a drop off. And that's of course concerning. And what we attribute that to, are we talking about just kind of saying, oh, I don't really care about this test, or do we have a significant problem? When you look at some other schools whose high school kneecaps are more successful than this, you have to say, well, it's certainly not the fact that they aren't getting the background that they need, because our curriculum, math curriculum at the high school mirrors a lot of other high school curricula. So that's an area that we're working on. You know probably, because I've talked to you about it before, but there is a math initiative in CSSU. We've been at it for a number of years, and it's all about changing our pedagogy to become much more problem solving and having our students think like mathematicians. And that has only just started at the high school this year. So I have to say, there, at the present, there are some students about to kick off into the high school that will meet a different approach, but that will gradually shift. So this kind of work, teachers are in studios, learning, watching, talking about best practice, and that goes on for 3 years. So it's going to take a while for this to kind of evolve at the high school level, but we're in that process. And this is one reason we're in that process. We have a concern.
Right, but if all the K-8s are consistent with all the other K-8s in the state, and the high school is consistent with all the other high schools in the state, then every SU in the state has this problem.
Right. Yes, that's true, and that's why it's important to look at us compared to the state. But
No, I'm just saying if you had a South Burlington chart, it would show the same trend.
it would. It's just that, yeah, that's true.
Right.
I mean, that goes to the point of the notion that it's an artifact of kids not trying on the test. I mean,
Or the test is
For instance,
more
the-
rigorous compared to what they've learned versus the 8th grade's rigor.
that would
versus
make more
what they've
sense
learned.
to me.
Right, I
Because I
think it's a
feel
combination.
the 11th grade cohort, that's flagged for reading, there's no drop-off, right?
Right.
There's some drop-off in writing, there's a very, very pronounced drop-off in math. So it can't be that there's varying degrees of effort. You know what I mean? Like they're trying really hard on reading, but not really trying that hard on math.
Yeah.
I suspect it's more
It
of
doesn't
a...
compute, right. And across the state, that gap between high school reading performance and math performance is pretty big. So I'm curious what will happen with SBAC, and also there's a shift in where we teach certain content. It's really going to shake things up, so we will see.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, because if you have 11th graders who are just starting Algebra 2, and, if they didn't do geometry in 9th grade, they might be tested on materials they don't even know yet, correct?
Right.
Whereas that wouldn't show up as much as in the 8th grade test, which is
Yeah.
what you've learned through 7th grade.
And that is exacerbated by the fact that the kneecaps are given in the fall of your junior year, as opposed to the spring of your junior year, when you've had whatever course content you're taking.
Right.
But again, going back to the point of you try to align the instruction with, like, the test should be what you're covering
Right.
in the classroom. So is there, knowing that that's what kids are expected to know by 11th grade, shouldn't we be covering it?
So that's the piece around our goal around Algebra 1.
Right, and I'll talk to you about what when this kind of became evident to us a number of years ago, true, around the state, it was the same, what are we gonna do? But we decided to do something, so I'm about to show you. And it hasn't had a residual effect yet, but I anticipate that it will.
One quick question.
Yeah.
With math, when you get into high school, there's sort of divergent paths of kids who sort of select math and kids who don't.
Yep.
And you have that number up there that shows 270 were in the high school, 271 were enrolled as 8th graders.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that number compare to literacy as far as are there folks that are sort of not doing well in math and don't test well or don't choose that path? Actually, that's the wrong number to ask about.
Yeah, because this is the same number of kiddos
So that's not the number.
all the way around for any 11th grader who was tested.
Is there a divergent choice for kids where they just don't, they're not going to study AP Calc, they're not going to study BC Calc?
Yeah, so for the kneecap, though, the expectation was that you'd had Algebra 2. So there are no test questions around calculus, trigonometry. It's Algebra 2 is what is expected.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Will that be true then in SBAC? Will it be the same? Algebra 2 will be the expectation by junior year?
Absolutely, if not more. Yeah, yes. So we started a little exploration of not only our data, which was pretty clear that we wanted to make some changes, but also the research out there about Algebra 1. And in doing that, we found out a lot of things. And one is that it truly is the gateway course. You've always heard it mentioned, that the data shows it opens the doorway to advanced math for students, that it's a predictor of achieving a bachelor's degree, that it's linked to job readiness. Some of the things that aren't there, that it is closely aligned with students who go on to higher math and stick with higher math, and it's aligned with math success in college. So there's a lot of indicators about what success with Algebra 1 provides students.
Do you mean success in Algebra 1 in 8th grade, or does it matter the
This
year
is in
that they?
general.
In general,
Yeah,
okay.
but then I decided to kind of dig into our data and look at what happens should students be able to accomplish Algebra 1 as 8th graders and what that does to them at the high school level, and what that affords them. So you can imagine, if a student's able to accomplish Algebra 1 as an 8th grader, what that opens up to them in terms of taking advanced math. It's only natural that there's more available to them. And the statistics are true in our district as they are in this research, that they tend then to go ahead in higher math and be successful in it. So on that note, we went about strengthening algebra, and we've done it in a number of ways. One is when we purchased Bridges and compared it with all the other math programs out there, it is an algebra-rich program. You can't just say, oh good, 8th graders, we want you to be good in algebra all of a sudden. You have to build that knowledge. So Bridges is very rich in pre-algebra, as is CMP, and both of those are being implemented right now. They're new. We have the new versions and we're in the midst of implementation, but that's one thing we've done. The other is to think about what we can do for all 8th graders, for the most part all, to expose them to Algebra 1, whether or not they decide to go for the credit, to go for accomplishing and finishing, but to expose them all so that Algebra 1 freshman year is more successful for them. So we took that on. Here are some of the data I collected when I was trying to figure out what was going on. These are students who, as freshmen, went on to take higher level math as freshmen. So they had to have accomplished Algebra 1 as 8th graders. And you can see over time the effect of our work in this area is that increasing number of students are taking higher level math courses at CPA. And I expect that that will grow over time as our students come up through the grades exposed to a stronger algebra-rich program. So that kind of bears out what we were talking about Algebra 1 and its effect. Here we have students who accomplished Algebra 1 in 8th grade, students who did not. Everybody, of course, has to accomplish these 3 graduation credits in math. Here we have students who finished Algebra 1 in 8th grade. They went on to at least one advanced course, whereas these students who did not accomplish Algebra 1 in 8th grade, far fewer. And then look at the difference here, Algebra 1 in 8th grade to go on to 2 advanced courses in high school, whereas these students, far fewer, go on to take 2. So I think the data is pretty clear here that this is a good way for us to be going, and it's not a California, thou shalt complete Algebra 1 as an 8th grader, do it or die, and then have most of those, that program died very quickly because so many students weren't ready. So we're in a gradual place of building a stronger basis for more students to be successful with Algebra 1 in 8th grade. It's going to take us a little while to build that base because not everybody's been through our newer programs and we're still even doing professional development around that. But that demonstrates what we're working toward and why.
So when you say an advanced math class,
Yep.
do you mean anything beyond Algebra 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, and the board, I have to give a 10-minute warning.
Okay, good. All right, so we'll move quickly, just give you a glimpse of what's going on for our students living in poverty. Again, just this boost going on at 11th grade for a little while, and that leveling off. And you can see that there's a pretty big disparity there. 11th grade here in the purple and at the brown. And our students on an IEP where the gap is much bigger. Again, you see progress, but a long way to go. A lot of things, I think 2009 is kind of pivotal, and a lot of things you're noticing, someone mentioned it earlier, but a lot of change began to occur after that. And now, you know, the more change you make, the harder it is to keep it going, so we're in that place. So, short of reading all this, I think you saw some of the biggest takeaways that 40% of this year's 8th grade class met with distinction in their performance. That's the highest percentage for math for 8th grade, actually for all of our kiddos, for that distinction accomplishment since I've been doing this. Really great. So we're excited about that. And we're really looking at what's going on in 11th grade with the high school math folks. And I told you already, they're deeply immersed in a professional development project right now. It's going to be 3 years from now that we, I imagine, see some results from that. Okay, a quick bit with science, 4th, 8th, and 11th grade, and that is being administered right now. So this is last year's results, and just the quick and dirty is that 4th grade has outshone our other grades in science, that both 8th and 11th grade are steadily marching forward. With a dip here, I don't know if that's a one-year anomaly or not, but really nice trend of improvement. I can attribute that to a very strong emphasis on inquiry that we worked on in every school. Then we developed our inquiry tasks, which then helped students work on extended, long inquiry projects. That's very definitely going to be woven into the new 2017 National Science Test. So I know we are seeing the effects of some professional development as well as some really strong teaching. We have a large number of Vermont Science Initiative graduates who are just amazing teachers. I do want to say that CCS 8th grade has the highest scores in the state, and Heinsberg has the 4th highest science scores at 8th grade in the state. All right, final conclusions. I think you heard me celebrate the whole way through, so I won't read this. And I know you want time for a few questions, a few more questions. I'm glad you've been going back and forth. We're singing about 5th grade writing, you know that. We're thrilled with science improvement. We have continued work to do in math. That's a concern area, has been, and we're dumping our attention, resources, professional development there. We're working really hard on Algebra 1, and we're going to see some results, and already do, as you know from the slides. So that's the short of all that up there. Areas of focus. While we see improvements in many areas, all of it with this change in the Common Core, the rigor, a shift in where we teach certain things, that puts a whole new frame on what we ought to focus on, which right now is pretty much everything, which is kind of scary, but we're trying hard, and our teachers are trying hard too, and doing a great job. But really, we have some strong work to do in all of our content areas right now, and we'll continue to do that. We do see steady improvement in a number of places, and that's exciting to see. 11th grade science is one of them, and we'll keep going there. You asked earlier, Susan, about, so what are we doing about it? And this is the time for you to hear just a little bit about our work with our whole system of Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, what goes on for students who are tangled, and how united is it with classroom instruction. We're deeply involved in data-driven decision-making, data teams. VCAT use is alive and well, and teachers are accessing that. I just talked to you about our math initiative, which is probably one of our larger efforts in professional development, and our focus on science. And I'll just say in terms of science that we have had a group of science lead teachers from around the SU meeting once a month this year to begin to unwrap the next generation science standards, which are no small thing. So you'll hear more about that next year or the year after. So I want to end very quickly with mentioning to you that research out there over and over again, strong research, reliable research, comes up with the same components that are about successful schools and about high-performing schools. So I just want to tell you what some of them are, and they overlap quite a bit. These are the things that make a difference, and when I read through them, I think, oh good, that is what we're working on. Laser-like focus on achievement throughout the school culture. Teachers are involved in collaborative scoring. That's high on the list. Collaboration around analysis of student work. That's data teams right there. Review of assessment data. Emphasis on nonfiction reading and writing from the 1990 study. This is a precursor to Common Core, but somebody was really noticing that we do too much with fiction and we need to dive into informational text. The Successful Vermont Schools Project, some of their outcomes, this is a really short version, obviously. Extensive professional development and targeted, I might add. Instructional leadership is key. Academic instructional focus, relationship, relationship, relationship between students, between administrators and students and teachers, the whole thing. Ongoing professional development connected to instruction, and a focus on assessment. So that's just a few, and when you read these research, this is just 3 samples, these come up and are revisited over and over again. So I end with the predominant factor in high-performing schools, and it's the teacher. The teacher matters. So we work really hard with our teachers and are forever looking for time for them to work together. Collaboration is another big piece. The teacher is the most influential factor in student achievement, and those are the variety of researchers who have said that. And so with that, I close.
I have time for one quick question if someone didn't get their, something new, okay? Thank you, Molly.
I have one then.
All right.
So you talked about Algebra 1 as being a success in Algebra 1 as being an important predictor of future success, and I think you listed a couple of things, that one was getting a bachelor's degree, for example.
Yeah.
So do you know how well the kids who don't pass out of Algebra 1 in 8th grade but then take it again in 9th grade, do you know how successful they are in the classroom in 9th grade algebra? Do you have that?
I think we could certainly check that out and see. I don't know right on the top of my head. I know that because now our approach is that we're exposing all 8th graders to algebra material, that success rate, whatever it is now, is going to get better because they will come in with far richer understanding of algebra, and their likelihood to succeed as a freshman will be better than it was, but I don't.
Right, I'm curious to see,
Yeah,
I mean,
me
that would
too.
be really great, even though when
Yeah.
they get to Algebra 2, they'll be juniors, so they really won't have a chance to take more than
Right.
one class beyond that. but-
Exactly. So I will check that. Yeah, thanks for
Thank you.
listening.
Thank you, Molly.
Okay. You're welcome.
Can I have a motion to go into executive session for negotiations? Kevin, thank you. Second, Russ?